You're listening to episode 41 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Faith Adiela joins us to speak about her experiences as your average Nigerian Nordic farm girl Buddhist nun in Thailand. Picture this. You're a complete outsider. You don't fit in because of your ethnicity, your background, your religion, your gender, everything. And you take that a giant step further by going to another country where you're even more alien and don't even speak the same language. Many of us have been or felt at some point in our lives that we were isolated in the crowd. Perhaps only a few of us have taken that situation and used it to deepen our meditation practice. Today's guest is one of those unique individuals. Faith Adiela is co-editor of Coming of Age Around the World, a multicultural anthology which contains 24 international stories ideal for college and high school classrooms. Her travel memoir, Meeting Faith, The Forest Journals of a Black Buddhist Nun, won the 2005 PEN Beyond Margins Award for Best Memoir of 2004. The PBS documentary, My Journey Home, is based on her life growing up in a Nordic American family and then traveling to Nigeria to meet her father and siblings. A popular speaker and contributor to O and Essence magazines, Faith has appeared on NPR, on The Tavis Smiley Show, and at universities around the world. She currently serves as the Distinguished Visiting Writer at Mills College in Oakland, California, and is at work on a social cultural memoir about her Nigerian Nordic American heritage. Recently, she was chosen as one of Marie Claire magazine's 5 Women to Learn From. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice cha dom yen. The recipe for this Thai drink is on the episode page. Faith, the reason I have you here today is one of my favorite books that is one on people's personal experience being a Westerner encountering Buddhism is your book, and I'm going to gloat because I have the hard copy first edition.
You win.
I win. Called Meeting Faith, The Forest Journals of a Black Buddhist Nun. And I read this when it came out many years ago, and it was just, it's a terrific book. And for folks that are listening to the podcast from iTunes, I do have a link to it on the episode page for this episode. And I do recommend if you're looking for a book about someone's personal experience, I'd say this is the one that's at top of my list. So I wanted to chat with Faith about that. Faith, I was wondering if you would tell us a bit about your background growing up, which is I think fairly unique for typical Western American Buddhist practitioners, and take your time. Tell us about growing up and what led you to having a Buddhist practice.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here and for being a supporter of my book. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And I love the opportunity to be able to chat about it. My past was very, as you said, unusual and meandering, and I don't even think I realized that I was on it. So I like to say that I was raised a typical Nigerian Nordic farm girl. My, one of those, that old chestnut.
Oh, yeah, that old thing. Can't swing a big bat without hitting one, yeah.
I know, beating that dead horse over and over again. I think my story began actually before my birth, with my parents. Both of my parents were the first in their families to go to university. My mother was the daughter of Nordic immigrants in the Pacific Northwest, and my father was a Nigerian. He was from the Igbo tribe in southeastern Nigeria and had been sent to London to get his education while Nigeria was still a colony of Britain. And so he was supposed to be this first generation of kind of freedom fighters. I think my mother was just an odd bookworm. They weren't quite sure what to make of her. Anyway, they both ended up at Washington State University and were very interested in international affairs and quickly became the first interracial couple on their campus of 10,000 students. This was in the early 60s. They were very much interested in African independence and in the civil rights movement and really saw, their lives as part of a kind of a larger international kind of struggle and narrative that was happening. So they were very, very idealistic. My grandparents quickly found out about it and separated the two, sending my mother far away, and they continued their relationship for another year in secret. My mother found out she was pregnant. My father ended up being called back to Nigeria, and we thought he had been killed in the Civil War, and the Nigerian Civil War. My mom and I, my mom was supposed to have an abortion, but she ran away and had me in a home for unwed mothers. And then was just, we were living on government assistance, just kind of trying to just, finish her education because she'd been a college student when this all happened. And eventually got her teaching degree and then reconciled with my grandparents, and we moved to their farm in Washington State, and that's where my kind of typical Nigerian Nordic upbringing began.
On the farm.
Right, on the farm. And strangely enough, that was not the weirdest part. The weirdest part was that we were the only kind of Democrats, non-Christians, union organized supporters in our town. And so being black was like, not even on my list of problems.
That was low in the air.
That was low. We didn't even know what that meant. It was just like, kind of managing, our family against the rest of the community. It was us against them. So I was raised at a very young age to stand up for what you believe in and to really be, like my parents had done, like take an active role whenever you see something happening, whenever you see oppression, you have to interrupt it. So much of my training was in empathy. My mom and I went to school, but my mom homeschooled me as well, like all summer and every weekend. I had this whole long curriculum that was very international because, of course, I wasn't getting any of that in our small school. And so she would, kind of rip up her old textbooks from college, and I had anthropology, I had world religions, I had history, all sorts of things to make me aware of the world out there and also to kind of increase my empathy for other people. And my mother is Unitarian, and the belief is that we can't be free if anybody else is in bondage. And so we didn't believe in Christianity, and we didn't talk a lot about religion. Our religion was, in fact, kind of politics. It was this kind of, spiritual political belief. And everybody in the family was invested in that. And so at a very, very young age, I was, standing up to teachers who would say racist things in school. It was never directed towards me. It was always directed towards the Latino and Chicana students because there was only one of me. And so this was kind of my upbringing. It was very, very political and really preparing me to get out of that small town and get out into the world. And I was really just was pretty anti-religion. I was interested kind of in a sociological and anthropological sense in the world religions that we were studying. And my mom said, you have to study all of these, and then when you're 18, you can decide what religion you want. But I wasn't particularly interested in religion beyond kind of the international aspect.
Or none.
Right, exactly. And it was primarily because the people I was surrounded with, born-again Christians, evangelical, the Christian right, and very self-righteous, very, you're going to go to hell. I was repeatedly being told that and being kicked out of my friendship groups. And so I thought religion was really a kind of a horrible thing used to hurt people. So I didn't really want to have any part of it. So, I liked, studying the other things, studying about the pageantry, and I thought Buddhism was interesting and that sort of thing. But, it was all very abstract. It really had nothing to do with me. My main preoccupation was getting out of my town. So that's where I put all my energy. So when I was 16, I was finally old enough to be an exchange student. And So I'd been studying Spanish, and I thought I would go someplace that was Spanish speaking, or I would go someplace in Europe, kind of tracing my mother's background.
Yeah.
And I had scored, very high, and so people had told me that I'd be able to go wherever I wanted. So I was, very, very excited about that. And then a few weeks later, they called back and they said, well, actually, we have to send you to Thailand. I was like, really?
And by anywhere, you mean Thailand.
Right, exactly. You can go anywhere you want, so long as it's Thailand. And this was like 1979, so like nobody went to Thailand at that point,
Right.
So I was like, where is it? And they're like, well, it's kind of near, Vietnam, which is, was just getting out of the war. And, it's kind of near Cambodia, so you're thinking killing fields. So I was,
right.
immediately.
Yeah, everything good.
Into tears. Right, I was like, what? So, this was way pre-Pad Thai, so, I was just devastated. And they said that, none of the American students that they had sent to Thailand had been able to adapt to the culture, to the food, to anything, and they were always causing trouble and being sent home. And so they said that Thailand had finally, given them an ultimatum. They said, we'll take one more round of American students, and then that's it. We're just going to, we'll go with Australians. We're cutting off America.
And you're listening to this thinking, wait, they want people who aren't going to stand up and cause trouble, and they want me. You're kidding, right?
But, the trouble was not being able to adapt, and I really prided myself on being very adaptable and international and interested, like not being, ethnocentric. And so when they said, we need you to save the program because you have scored so high in adaptability, because, of course, I had lied through my teeth and said that I would eat and do anything just so long as I could get out of my hometown. It was all bull, but
but maybe not. You ended up doing just about anything to get out.
I did end up doing right. It's true. But up until then, my mom started cracking up, and they were asking me, would you eat a fried rodent? I'm like, yeah. My mom was like, oh my God, she won't even eat. If her Jello touches her lasagna at a picnic, she won't eat it. So she was cracking up.
And she's not eating the lutefisk, and that's bad.
Exactly. I was a bad Scandinavian. So, so that was it. That was the first time I'd heard about Thailand, but I had a mission, and I was always a girl for a mission. So it's like, we have to prove that Americans are adaptable. You have to go to Thailand. And so that was kind of the beginning of my love affair with Thailand. So I did end up going a few months later I was there for the year, age 16 to 17, and really fell in love with the place. Because there were so many cultural influences came together there. And so it was just really fascinating to see what was coming from East Asia, what was coming from Southern Asia, the fact that Thailand had never been colonized, the fact that the Eastern mindset was just so different from the American mindset from the West where I'd grown up. And also the fact that at that point, since there were so very few Americans traveling in Thailand, they had no idea what a black person was. And so I had an entire year off from being black, which was a great relief. I don't know if you've ever been black in America, but it can get exhausting. So it was really quite lovely. I was way up in the north, up in the Golden Triangle, and they hardly had, there was one Peace Corps volunteer, like a 30-year-old white man, and then, some Europeans who were just, way out there on heroin and could barely speak. And that was about it. And so, when I would go to when I would walk through town in my little tight schoolgirl uniform, everybody would rush out and ask me, they'd be like, yo, what are you? And everybody would be standing there, and I'd say, well, I'm American. And they're like, well, we've seen some of those on TV, and you don't look like one. So I said, well, Americans come in all colors, and I happen to be Nigerian and Nordic American. And they're like, huh, okay, that's really beautiful. And then they would just go inside. And so that was just it. They had no preconceived notions. Their response to any difference was, that's lovely, that's wonderful, which is completely the opposite of our response to difference. And people just left me alone. And so I've been really kind of profoundly impacted by that experience. This is a really long way of getting to Buddhism. But Thailand had saved me once. I think it's really kind of what helped me get through my high school years was that year there, and realizing that there was a completely different way of looking at the world. That was symbolized by the East and by societies that were more communal based, and just by the importance of kind of politeness and just all the ways that the way Thai society is, which is just so different, was just such a challenge. And so it was just really freeing for me to be there. So then a few years later, I went back. I I took an extra year, graduated from high school, and then went to Harvard on scholarship, which I thought was going to be my real big break. This was really kind of lovely because my mom had just gone on and on about how wonderful college was and it had expanded her horizons, and it's where she really got to, go international and had met my father, and, they felt that they were really part of a movement that was changing the world, and that was, uniquely tied to being at college and having this, role in critiquing society and that sort of thing. So I thought it was going to be like that, and it wasn't. It was, Boston in the early 80s, which was the me decade, and it was all about everybody padding their resumes, and people had come from really privileged backgrounds. And I just started to feel very alienated. Boston itself was still reeling from the busing and the extreme violence that had happened there. And so it was very segregated society, very dangerous. To me, you had to know like what side of town you could be on, because otherwise you could get beaten up depending on what color you were. The university itself, they would bring people of all stripes there, but they didn't really know what to do with us, and they weren't able to support us in any way. So it was like, we've given you a scholarship, just deal with it.
Yeah, but the rest you're on your own.
Right, you're on your own. And it was completely overwhelming, mainly social. I mean, academics were hard, though, because I'd never, I didn't really have the study skills that were necessary because I never had to have them. But I think just socially navigating those waters and the extreme chauvinism, the extreme racism, extreme classism, those of us, we were always looked at as scholarship students, and people would say that to our faces. You're only here because of affirmative action. And so it just became too overwhelming. Plus, I was really interested in kind of doing experiential education. I was doing a lot of community service work and starting to move into social justice work. And I really wanted to kind of connect that to the theory in my classes, and that just wasn't deemed, kind of a viable sort of way of learning. That just had no value at all. And so I just started to go to my classes less and become kind of alienated and overload myself with extracurriculars. And I soon was headed towards flunking out, towards failing my classes. And so I did. I really worked hard at failing them. Actually, it was kind of a spectacular sort of failure.
I'm thinking about it because you talk about it now, and you chat about this in the book as well, that I don't see how anyone really could have succeeded under those conditions of being surrounded by people who are typically of privilege, who are looking at you in a way you're only here because of affirmative action, and the only response you can have is like, well, yeah, I was able to get a scholarship. You're here because of Daddy's money, and that would be a way to shut them up for a moment. But really, the whole structure of, you're young, you're away from home, things have always been a little different, and you've always stood out, and now you're in a place where now people are just going out of their way to be antagonistic. Of course, it would be really hard to succeed under that, especially being Harvard. There's some scholastic expectations, too, that might be a little stressful.
That's true. I mean, I think if I'd been like first generation immigrant, I would have been like stronger stock. Just like suck it up, because like all my Nigerian friends are just like, yeah, every time I heard that just made me like more determined to succeed. I was like, really? It just made me cry. You're like, that's because you've been in America too long. You're soft. So I think the second generations are a little bit of a loser. They're a little too sensitive.
Yeah, we didn't have to swim across the ocean to get here,
Right, exactly. So, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I guess it is understandable, but I still do feel like, someone else could have like sucked it up. But I took it in. I took it inside. I let it shut me down. And my anger, I didn't really know where to direct it, because I knew what they were saying was wrong, but there was no vocabulary to challenge that, and there was nobody else saying anything differently, and whenever you would complain to Harvard about something, they'd say, well, we're 350 years old, which is 50 years older than America. You're 19. Yeah. It's like, okay, you have a point there. Right, exactly. So it's like, okay. So yeah, I didn't know how to ask for help. And, as a scholarship student where everybody's hopes are resting on you too, I felt, I didn't feel like I could go back to my family and say, everything that we, sacrificed for, it's not really paying off. It's not really working. So, I shut down basically. And so, kind of crashed and burned spectacularly and had to leave. You have to leave Harvard for a year if you've flunked out. So I was kind of staggering around campus trying to figure out what was going to happen. And I ran into a friend who said, oh, I just saw a poster for a new study abroad program in Thailand, being run through the University of Wisconsin. Like, oh my God, no way. So I ran over there, and I just missed the deadline, but I called them. I told them about my previous experience. They were excited. They said, send me your stuff. We'll hold it open for you. And so I got into the program. We spent the summer doing intensive Thai language and preparing for what sort of research. We were going to go to school at the university, but we also had to have a research project of our own. And so I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And so one of the guys that I was rooming with in the summer had this whole plan where he'd been studying Buddhism. Then he was going to spend all this time going to monk ceremonies, hanging out at the temple, doing whatever. And at the end, he was going to ordain. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I could do that, but on the female end, because I'm, always been interested in women's issues, and, this would be great, women of color, blah, blah, blah. And so as soon as I started saying that, everybody started laughing at me.
Yeah.
Said, well, there are no nuns. And they're like, no, there are no nuns. And when I got to Thailand, people really lost their mind. And every time I would say that, they would say, broken heart, broken home. If you mentioned the word nuns, they would say, broken heart, broken home. They just spew it out automatically. It was like a knee-jerk reaction. They couldn't stop themselves from saying broken heart, broken home. And I'm like, what is that about? And they're like, that's why women ordain, because they failed at life in some way. And so they go to the temple. So that convinced me that I had to research nuns, because, tell me I can't do something. So I knew that there was something there that people didn't want to talk about, didn't know anything about, and I really needed to, and that was what really interested me, was the sociological aspect of women's conditions then, given that they weren't, getting all the accolades, and they didn't have the tax-free status, and they weren't being given donations by, grateful lay people, given that they were, half the time starving in these temples and acting as servants to the monks, even if they were allowed to stay in a few temples that did accept nuns. I was like, why would women choose this profession? And then once I started hanging out with them and talking to them, I'd never seen such kind of kind, gentle, peaceful women who were just, when someone's enlightened or at peace, their face just kind of glows. These women were just so fantastic and clearly so happy. And I'd say, why did you choose this profession? And over and over again, they'd say, because I've never been more free. And I just couldn't understand that answer, because to me, it didn't look like free. I mean, I understood not feeling free, but I didn't understand where the freedom came from. So I became very, very intrigued with this. But again, I wasn't interested in the religious aspect or even the spiritual aspect. I don't think at that point I was aware that there was a difference between religion and spirituality. I was just interested in the sociological aspect. But the man who was my advisor at the university, who had been a former abbot and a really kind of wonderful, wise man who would just take me around from temple to temple, and he said, he kept on warning me. He said, when you Westerners do studies, you come to some place, you take some notes about some brown people, you come to some conclusions, and you go back and you say, this is how it is. And he said, don't make that mistake. He said, you're asking them a sociological question. They're responding in spiritual language. So one, you can't represent their story because you're speaking two different languages. You don't know the language they're speaking. And he said, two, you can't really tell someone's story unless you've walked in their shoes or unless you've really risked something. What are you willing to risk? And I thought that was beautiful. And I really understood that on a political sense, because I knew in terms of kind of my social justice and my political work that was indeed true. That if you were going to be an ally with somebody and affect actual change as opposed to coming in and, being a savior, you really need to change yourself too and kind of really dismantle structure. So I thought that was really interesting. So we were talking about the idea of me, spending time in the temple, like moving in and at least, living the same lifestyle, that, 2 meals a day, getting up early, the kind of aesthetic life. And I was afraid of it because I'm not very disciplined, and I do like my luxury. So I'd been toying with it and trying to figure out, which temple would I want to be at and stuff. And then we met this amazing woman, Meshi Rungdun, who I write about in the book. We met her at the ceremony, and she was different from any other nun that I'd met. She was college educated. She was young. She was middle class. She defied the stereotype of broken heart, broken home. She had chosen this actively as a profession. She had graduated college and chosen to be a lifelong nun. And, her family was completely shocked and appalled because they were firmly middle class. They were like, what have we done wrong? And so, they're just like, what? We have a policeman, we have a school principal, we have a lawyer, and a nun?
We swear we didn't send her off to the nunnery. This is her idea.
Exactly. They were completely shocked. And she told me her story that she had not actually been a Buddhist, which is very shocking for any Thai person to admit that. She said, of course she went to the temple with her family, but she didn't really believe. And she didn't believe that there actually had been a historic Buddha. She thought that there was a tale that was told to kind of keep people in line. And so she had not believed. And at one point she had met a monk, I think from Sri Lanka, who was a forest monk. And he was like, not getting fat on the support of the community, really, walking the walk. And so she was really interested in him and what he was saying. And he was really dynamic and charismatic. So she decided to kind of try some of the things that he was doing. Try meditating, try being on her own in the forest and that sort of thing. And from there, she became a believer and saw that her health changed, her state of mind changed, that she wasn't questioning her purpose in life and not filled with ennui anymore. She understood. And so at age whatever, 26 or whatever, then she, converted all the way. And so I was really fascinated by her and thought she would be perfect for my study. And so I wanted to interview her. So she said, well, come and find me at this temple. When she mentioned the temple, my advisor got all excited because it was this temple that, supposedly has very, very good conditions for women, almost equal to men. Knew he hadn't been there, and he's like, we've got to go. So the next week we went out and tried to find the temple. It's not a tourist temple. It's not a place where you would go and hang out. It was like in the forest, just attached to a small village. And you had to speak Thai, and you had to know where you were going to find it to start with. So it did not have this, it was not covered in gold leaf, expecting people to come and fill it copper. Clearly
just
something else was
following the
happening.
yellow brick road glowing in the distance.
Right, exactly. So we went for it. We looked, we're hiking, we're taking a bus, we're hiking, blah, blah, and then finally we get there, and it's stunning. It's like walking into a Japanese wood carving, I think I described it in the book, because it's, there are these rock walls, there's mountains, and there's like a stream falling out from between the rock crevices, and or waterfall, and then it becomes a stream as it comes towards us, and there are these little picturesque bridges, and on one side, it's the monk side, which gets the sun, and the monks are out there in their saffron robes, and they're doing all these activities, and these dogs are chasing after them, and on the other side, it's all green and shade with pavilions and giant butterflies, and these nuns in white kind of drifting around slowly meditating, and she's standing there in the middle just smiling, like she knew we were coming, and I'm sure all the villagers would say, there's a black person coming, but she's magical at the time, it's question. Exactly. And so when I saw, I was like, I'm ordaining, and that's the moment. I didn't even say I'm moving in. Like I said, I'm ordaining when I saw it. And my guys just kind of nodded, and then they started negotiating. And I didn't pay attention to anything, which then later I found out after I ordained that I hadn't chosen a normal temple. There was a reason that it was in the forest. It was, in fact, a forest temple with all sorts of crazy rules that, had I known, I would have never agreed to ordain there, because I would have never thought that I had what it took to live that way. But so at that moment, I think is just, I kind of responded on a visceral level. And then it wasn't until I had gone through the ordination ceremony, like maybe a month later, and I was there, and everybody left me, and she turned to me and she said, remember when I told you that first day that this is not an ordinary temple? I'm like, no. And so she explained, how it was completely not ordinary, and that there would be a vow of silence. So I, wouldn't be doing all these interviews, and that it was 1 meal a day, and that it was 19 hours of mindfulness, that it was heavy, heavy duty. And then she said, if I tell you what we're doing, you'll forget it. But if I show you and you touch it for yourselves, you'll always remember. And then afterwards, any woman who wants to break her vow of silence to be interviewed by you can. Does that seem fair? And I was like, oh my God, of course that seems fair. She's changing everything for me, and she's giving me this amazing opportunity. And that was the moment where I was wondering, well, am I doing this for anthropological research, or am I seeking something else? Am I hungry for something else? And that's how I have to So this is the moment to decide. Clearly, I'm being offered two different things here. And even though I wasn't completely aware of what I was looking for, I knew enough to know I was looking for something. And so I said yes.
Yeah, and you do describe that sequence in the book, and to me that's what stood out as this to me is the meeting faith part right there. Mm-hmm. Was confronted with what am I actually doing here? And you speak very eloquently and admiringly about your teacher there, and how she really helped you strip away and take a close look at, wait, what am I actually doing?
Right. Yeah, she was fantastic. really fantastic.
So tell me, what was the most rewarding aspect of that journey and your time there?
Wow, everything was kind of wonderful, but I think helping me overcome fear. I mean, because everything we were afraid to do was the thing we were supposed to do, and she was so adept at figuring that out. And every time she would, pick the one thing I didn't want to do and tell me that that was my lesson for the day. Once I lived through it, at first I'd curse her, and then I'd say I couldn't do it, and then I would do it, and then I would be free. And so it was like every day a little shackle was like unhinging, and as you just kind of march into your fears. And so, you could take that forever, and you can apply that everywhere. And it was, and so that was really a stunning gift.
Well, and lots of opportunity, because for you, you describe several sequences in the book where it's hot and cold running snakes, and snakes, not one of your favorite creatures, but you ended up having to address that and move past it and understand, wait a minute, this is another living creature.
Right.
No,
how much of our behavior actually comes from fear then? I mean, we do things that are cruel to others out of our own fear, or we live fully out of fear. And so fear is so key in kind of overcoming that, or knowing it's motivating you so that, you don't, to kill something because you're afraid of it. That's really a horrible thing. But
right.
When you're in the midst of the fear, you don't think about that.
Right. Then it's no longer an issue where you have to take a negative action, because the impulse there, not so much anymore.
Right.
Now you describe this is a very intensive practice, a very intensive meditation practice. Looking back, did you find it that very valuable to your personal growth, and how so?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'd always kind of imagined myself as an undisciplined person, and also someone who wasn't very much rooted in my body. I mean, I hadn't done sports. I wasn't, we were people of the mind. And so even though we did, like camping and horseback riding and stuff like that, I didn't have a lot of, my confidence in myself really rested in my intellect, and not in any kind of, any of my physical abilities. And, so being able to commit myself to something that I didn't think I could, simply, to be able to achieve something that was higher than you, that like in order to be wise or to stay on the path, or even to live up to what this person believes in you, the fact that the head nun seemed to believe in me, God knows why, that made me do things that I didn't think that I was capable of. So that's really, that's amazing. It was really fantastic to see that I could be that disciplined, and see then how quickly your life could transform by following this practice, which opened up a completely new world for me, because I'd never had a spiritual experience other than, kind of sometimes being in nature and enjoying it. But even that kind of made me uneasy. And so to have this entire world open up to you and realize that you could really change your life, and you could really be in control of your state of mind, and also kind of control your physicality, was just an amazing kind of new thing to learn and gift to get.
Yeah, and you have plenty of opportunity to practice there. It sounds like in a setting that is just perfect for a mindfulness practice and for deep meditation.
Well, people seem to, people say, oh my gosh, you were doing 19 hours a day. That seems so hard, but it's actually, you're right. It was easier there because everything's set up for it. Everybody around you is doing it. There's like, people aren't listening to video games. Cable TV is not there. The setting is beautiful, and there are people around you to support you. So it's actually much easier to do it there than to do it in America for half an hour, I think.
Right. Yeah, where, we have various things going on in the backgrounds in our lives, and just the energy of activity that's around us, we know, and we have as a regular distraction. And in that kind of setting, and one reason that I like doing retreats at forest monasteries for that reason, because those distractions are far away, and they're just not on the menu of the day.
Right.
So tell me, you were sometimes challenged by gender inequality issues in Thailand, and how did you deal with those?
In the temple or outside of the temple?
Either, both.
Okay. It was easier to deal with when I was a nun, because I also felt like well, all of this is strange.
Yeah, everything is weird.
Right. So I will be playing the part of the nun, hopefully, and hoping that my robes won't fall off. It's always much easier to kind of accept the thing, hook, line, and sinker. Okay, so I'm also going to be at this lower status than it was out in the ordinary world, where it was more kind of annoying, and also then just seeing the dangers of that sort of approach with the sex trade and that sort of thing, where it was like really kind of heartbreaking. Whereas in the temple, you saw women being empowered, and even those women who did fit the broken heart, broken home stereotype coming into the temple for a while, at least getting some sort of solace and mindfulness, self-determination, support from other women before they went back out. And so the temple was actually quite a lovely place to be. And there were these, kind of renegade nuns there too, who were saying like, I plan to be enlightened even though I'm a woman. I don't have to be reborn as a man and come back and ordain as a monk to be enlightened. I plan to be enlightened in this body, in this lifetime.
Yeah,
so really these great renegade, Buddhist feminists there. And so it was much easier to deal with it there. And the abbot was very respectful of women and very kindly. And so it was much easier to deal with it there. And it kind of helped me figure out. Okay, so then I was trying to figure out like how much of the Buddhist ideal is also part of whatever the sociological, societal kind of gender typing that happens as well. It was easier there. And so many of the women, it was interesting seeing how they negotiated it and saying, a lot of times they'd say, well, what happens to my physical body doesn't matter. I'll transcend. Which I think was a very interesting and kind of smart way of transcending, of kind of dealing with the fact that they were hungrier, just actually literally hungrier in most of their temples. So I thought it was interesting. So I think that's seeing how people negotiated that and kind of made loopholes, which also really reminds me of kind of the role of Black women historically in America, kind of making a way out of no way and finding, where you can get self-determination and freedom within a very constrained system. That was really interesting to me.
Do you think that being a very obviously unable to hide it foreigner gave you a certain degree of wiggle room with being empowered?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. And it's always the case. I'm teaching a class on women travel writers right now with my grad students. It's like, and a Western woman gets to be an honorary man in many societies. She can do the things that, traditional women can't do. She can sit with the men as opposed to cleaning the chicken and plucking it and being out and back, preparing it. She can sit up front and drinking beer and talking to the men. So you get that freedom. You can move around by yourself. And so definitely you can use that outsider status, to your advantage. And then hopefully kind of do some good with it too, kind of plant some seeds and ask some questions and kind of show what women are capable of. I mean, the reason that I did have this huge ordination ceremony is that, my advisor, who I've, referenced previously, really he was very committed in raising the status of Thai women in Buddhism. So he said, look, here's this college-educated foreigner who so interested and believes in nuns that she's ordaining as a nun. And so, he arranged for me to be ordained at the Royal Temple of the North, first ceremony that had ever been held for a woman. Now, should it have been a foreign woman? No, but at least, there was that wiggle room to allow me to do it, and that kind of paved the way. That was something he could point to. And so I was happy to be able to allow my body to be used in that way, because I was going to get advantages of being a foreign woman as well.
Now, there was something kind of stepping a bit to the left on topics. This is that additional question I was going to ask you, that one of the sequences in the book that really stood out to me and is my favorite part of it is an experience you had with another Westerner at the Riverside Tea House. And tell us in your own words, if you about that. And kind of what was it that happened?
It's hard not to plagiarize myself now.
Yeah, you can do that. It's not plagiarism if you wrote it. It's okay.
I'm so derivative. Okay, so tell you in my own words, kind of about what?
About your own words about this experience with the Westerner, where you're at a tea shop, and
right.
Yeah, you're the foreign. Someone walks up and says.
Well, initially she reaches out because she's happy to see another American. And, normally I try to stay away from tourists, but, she's someone who'd been living there for a few years. And she said, she just wanted to have an American conversation. And I can, understand that. There are times when you don't want to translate. You just want to just be yourself. And so, I was kind of flattered that she had kind of recognized me, because oftentimes when I travel, my own people don't recognize me because I'm black. So they just kind of think, oh, native. Even though Thailand's not a black country.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I've gotten.
I am occasionally truly horrified by my species.
Yes. So yeah, I'm not. Like I'll see Americans. I'll be like, oh, they're Americans, and they never see me. Their eyes just always glance past me. And I'm like, wow, okay, so they're just not looking at anybody who's brown, regardless of what race that might be. Yeah. So it was. I was flattered to have been recognized to start with, and she also didn't seem like she seemed to have this kind of calmness in this demeanor. So I thought, okay, she's serious. She's not just one of these spring break people or something like that. She's not here on the sex trade. She's not here on all this other stuff. She's a serious person, and she's recognized me, has come over to me. So I was really kind of touched and open. So then that prepared me for the sucker punch when it turns out that she wanted to know if I had a relationship with Christ. And I was like, oh, God damn it.
So to speak.
Exactly. So I was so kind of devastated by that, because I thought that our relationship was based on something else.
On something more than trying to sell you an ideological view.
Exactly. In Thailand, of all places.
In Thailand.
So I mean, I guess people come seeking, and so they figure, well, you're open to anything. But yeah, so I was just like, I'm out of here. And she was like really kind of chasing after me and like, no. And she seemed kind of sad. Like, it was really interesting. Like, we had this kind of connection still, and I was like trying to get out of there. And she said, well, at least just tell me your name. And, which normally would be fine. But if your name's Faith and there's a Christian missionary after you, it's not a good idea. But I'm not good at lying.
Well, and you said, I muttered faith under my breath, knowing full well that upon hearing it, any proselytizer worth her conversionary salt would conclude that the salvation of my eternal soul was a personal test from God, one deserving all the extra credit. And sure enough, the woman says, you were sent to me. Don't you see? There must be a reason. Your name is Faith. And you replied, yes, there is indeed. And you get on your scooter and you peel off, because the reasons that you have this name are wholly not at all what this person was thinking. And
exactly.
I'd chat a little bit about that, because I think that's one of the key parts to you in your standing up is how that name came about, and your story with your mom. Let's just chat a little bit about that and kind of what your mom's experiences were.
Right. So when my mom is kind of, deciding whether or not she's going to keep this interracial baby when she's in the home for unwed mothers, and there's a lot of pressure for her to give it up. And at that point, she's broken up with my father. She's, been thrown out of her family. She hasn't seen an interracial child before, so she was a little scared. She's 19 years old. She hasn't been able to complete college. She knew that the African tradition of naming is that the child's name has to be a sentence that kind of determines her destiny. And so she knew the first, second, and last name all have to be destiny. So she knew she was going to give me my father's name, regardless of the fact I hadn't been married, just because she wanted me to have my Nigerian heritage. She knew my middle name was going to be the Finnish name that all the women in my family have. So I have my Finnish heritage. And she didn't know what the first name would be, but she thought, well, these others are pretty long and elaborate. It should be really strong and punchy. And she said she has no idea why she named me Faith. But together, they did form an auspicious phrase. And then, of course, the Nigerian thing is that then you find out what your name means and you live up to it. And so, once I realized that, I was like, well, one, I have to figure out why she named me Faith. And the more I did research into the circumstances of my birth, and she hadn't told me any of this stuff, she had whitewashed it and made it seem like it was fine. I was only 16, a few years before I went to Thailand the first time, that I found out, that she had been disowned and I'd been born in this home for unwed mothers. And so as I researched who she was and how she must have been and this leap of faith she was taking, I was like, well, it's pretty clear why I've been named this, and now I have to fulfill that destiny, and bring together those different cultures that were separated and, interrupted by the schism in our family. So it's certainly not about Christianity, but it's about faith in the possibility of cultural exchange and in changing the world. And that's what, I need to be doing, not developing a personal relationship with Christ.
Yeah, not the personal relationship, right? Although that's fine for many people. That's great, cool, awesome. We talk about the word itself, faith, and how we have such really very different approaches to it. And on the Judeo-Christian sense, the belief in things unseen part of it, and in the Buddhist sense, we have more the sense the meaning of confidence as you experience that you have some curiosity about it, you try it a little bit, you have some experience, and you have more confidence, and you're sharing yet another way of looking at the word faith as just being open to possibilities and making things better. That one doesn't have to have it as a mindless hope based on nothing, that one can simply know that this is going to take rolling our sleeves up, and it's going to take effort, and there are challenges that get thrown in our way that we can deal with. And that also is a meaning of faith, and one of the more positive sides as I would see it.
And very much like love, I feel.
Yes.
Love requires faith, and faith is a form of love. So.
Yeah, very much so. Now, I also wanted to chat a little bit. We are recording this day. It won't be coming out but we're recording this today on Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
You may have thought I was joking when I put in the question, what you got cooking for Thanksgiving? But actually, I want to ask that because you also do food writing, too. So I want to hear about your Thanksgiving, what you're doing.
Well, sadly, doing the weirdest thing possible. I am going over to some British people's house for dinner.
Do they know what turkey is? I mean, no offense to my Brit listeners, but Thanksgiving isn't really a Brit holiday, is it? I didn't think.
No, it's not. In general, I try not to have dinner at a British person's house ever for any reason.
Okay, I didn't say that.
So yes, that is my chauvinism. So yes, I find it extremely ironic that I'm going to be having a British Thanksgiving. But actually,
bangers
don't like
and mash for Thanksgiving, I think.
Right, exactly. I've actually never liked Thanksgiving. It's one of my least favorite holidays. So it's not a big deal to me. So it doesn't really matter.
Well, I'm glad you're here with us, but this is also a segue into some of your other writing that you do, and people can find out more about this. I want to make sure that I read this off to you, that Faith's website is www.adiele.com, adiele.com. And she also has a link to that to her blog on Blogspot. And you mentioned a lot of the books that you already have. This is just one, to me, is the one I encountered first and am very enraptured with. But you do a lot of travel writing, and tell me about that and the food writing.
Well, I realize that almost everything I'm writing about is a journey in some way. The two main ones being this trip to Thailand, where I, did lots of other things as well, have been able to spin a lot of stories off of that. And then the eventual trip that became the PBS documentary and is the basis of the new book that I'm just finishing up on going to Nigeria and finding my father and my siblings, since I've spent a lot of time in West Africa and then also went to Finland and Sweden. But to me, it seems like travel is just a metaphor for almost, kind of any writing we do, or just kind of our condition of life. We go out on the road, we're young, we're innocent, we have some sort of hurdles and transformation, and then we arrive someplace new, which might in fact be the place we started from, but we are shifted. And so, and because I love traveling so much, I just thought, well, if I start telling people I'm a travel writer, maybe I'll get some gigs. So I've really become interested in just the whole idea of traveling. Also in particular, because women's travel writing is a whole new subgenre right now, but there's very little on folks of color travel writing. And in general, the most traveled people in the world are, in fact, women of color, but usually that's not, that's not agented travel. That's not travel for pleasure. That's travel of necessity, either political or economic. So it has a different dynamic to it. But I just realized that so many places where I went, I was the first Black woman they had seen, and that changes the landscape and the interaction. So I became really interested in just kind of using my body as a metaphor for kind of, checking out these places. And so I like the challenge. I like writing things that are complicated. So I want you to kind of fall in love with a place, but also see the complexity of it, and then also learn more about, how my identity then impacts that place. I feel that I have a certain kind of affinity to places because I have this interesting position because I'm privileged as a Westerner, but I'm not necessarily the most privileged because of, race and gender and stuff like that. So I think that just throws an interesting element into it. And I think travel writing can just be really amazing because, you have to know about history, you have to know politics, you have to know the sociology of the place, but you also have to have really kind of wonderful descriptions and details. And so I think, you have to tell a great story so you get character and setting and, political, sociological import, but then also just a great story and setting. And so I think you have to really work on all your skills to be able to tell a good travel tale. And it has an impact on really changing the way people think about a place.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you currently working on the memoir about the Nigerian trip and looking up your Nigerian Nordic farm girl heritage?
Yes, it is. What am I saying now? My tagline is 4 generations, 3 continents, 400 pages, and growing. So I plan to be done with that by Christmas.
Okay.
I've been working on it for a long, long time.
So
and
I'm curious about that. I was wondering, it's not out yet, so I want to know what can you tell us about that? What teasers do you have for us before it comes out?
Sure. Well, I mean, there are segments, there are chapters that have been published that you can access on my website.
Okay.
Because they've been in anthologies and magazines, O Magazine, Essence, and various anthologies. So I have little aspects like the first time I met my father or the first time I met my siblings. But it's pretty fantastic because it was all kind of accidental. Someone gave me a scholarship to go to Nigeria that I hadn't asked for. Mm-hmm. And originally we thought my father had been killed, and it turns out that he hadn't, and he'd become this famous politician. But his famous name, not many people have this name, and like the minute I got off the plane, he knew I was in the country, even though there were 120 million people in this country. Yeah. And so it was just, all sorts of drama. I'm an only child for my mother, and the only Black person in my family. But I had 3 siblings who were all very much like me in different ways, even though we had never met, including my sister, who looks so much like me, except for the fact that she's darker, that people in the village thought that I was her spirit double because I'm light-skinned, but I look like her, and they didn't know I was her. So when I went back home, everybody screamed and ran into the forest. We had to tell them that I was human.
And who hasn't had that experience?
I know, not that one again. So, so things like that. It's pretty dramatic.
That's amazing because I not having followed that part of it, I didn't know about the siblings and all that, and to find that you have a sibling, let alone one who looks like, I grew up with brothers and we don't look alike. They're the ones I know and have been with my whole life. I don't look like. So finding one so far away that there is that similarity and that people notice enough to go screaming and running away into the forest has got to be an amazing experience.
Right, yeah. And then the fact there that I'm considered white, and so that makes for some interesting complications too. She'll tell people, I really love her and I have this sister, but she's white. You have to understand. And then I'll go, okay.
You probably haven't been called white much before, I'm guessing.
Right, exactly. So there's that whole thing. So it's just, again, complicating our kind of ideas of home and family and race and identity. And so it's been a really interesting experience becoming part of this family from I met them at age 26 and then, trying to negotiate a relationship, as an adult. So it's all sorts of interesting things. And then I found all these parallels between that family and our family in Finland, and with these kind of things that happen. And then also just kind of trying to figure out everything that happened during the war, because my father, before he passed, refused to talk about it. And so it's been this lot of investigation and just really, really rich material.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm really eager for that. So when might we be seeing that? There's bits of it on your web, but when's it actually coming out? I want another first edition here.
Okay, right.
I'm eager. I already got one first edition of your books. I gotta have.
That's right. Just stick with it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm hoping to finish it this Christmas, so then it should be like a year before it's on the shelves.
For publishing. Okay, so I have time to make room on my bookshelves. Now, you also, in our chatting back and forth in preparing for this interview, I'd sent you an email note asking if you would consider being in the podcast, and you can take a look at the website and see some of the things I've done recently. And you replied back, "Oh, and I see you've spoken with Spring Wisham that was recently on," and I'm like, "Oh, do you know her?" And you're like, "Oh, yes, we sit together at East Bay." I'm like, what? Okay, so everybody in California seems to know each other. How does that work?
It's funny. I've just been here for 15 months, actually. I just moved out to California. It was interesting because when Meeting Faith first came out, I was touring and I went out to Spirit Rock, and the subcommittee of folks of color took me out for dinner and kind of used my visit as an opportunity to kind of talk about what they had in mind. And they said, they wanted a center that was like more urban, that could really, be addressing the needs of communities who would never have access to mindfulness and meditation, in downtown Oakland, people who would really be using it. And they had this dream. And then, 5 years later, I come back here for a job, and the East Bay Meditation Center is there, and it's functioning, and it's where the people of color sit on Thursday nights, and there's a LGBTQI sit on Wednesday nights, and people are doing things in the schools, and it's just, I was like, it happened. It was all the people I had dinner with are, founders and teachers there, and so it was just lovely to walk back and to have this place. Because one of the things that had, been difficult for me when I came back from Thailand is that I didn't have a community to sit with. I didn't want my spiritual practice to be yet one more environment that I was integrating. And there were no folks, there were no Black folks doing Buddhism at that point. And so it just kind of, went by the wayside. I didn't have a community to keep the practice up with. Plus I hadn't had a practice in America, so I didn't really know how to do it, other than being in the temple, in the forest.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of, how do you do that? I didn't have a happy medium. And so it's been really lovely. This gift to, move to Oakland and find this ready-made and growing community.
And that's exactly what Spring and I were chatting about, was the founding of East Bay Meditation Center and how that came about and what led to it. And that one of the things that in the approach that I'm trying to foster in secular Buddhism is that you have a practice that can integrate and merge just fine with whatever culture it finds itself in. That we're not looking at this practice as one must be a part of this culture or this ethnic group or this whatever in order to do the practice, to make it more transplantable, usable by everyone, because it's a person thing. It's not a specific culture thing, and that's what this is about. So it's always the conversation we had with Spring was terrific in talking about how to build inroads to people who otherwise would not have the opportunity to even be aware of a mindfulness practice. Right, exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Faith, thank you so much for being here. This has been a terrific conversation. Folks listening, again, Faith Adiele, and the website is www.adiele.com. The book that we've been chatting about here is Meeting Faith, but there are several other out there, particularly the travelogues look like a lot of fun. And you talk about food in them, which was really fun. Yes. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.